Hi folks, welcome to my first video of 2018. I'm back to doing another video update. I think I might have mentioned that where I live here in the west coast of the UK, we don't have much in the way of record shops. The nearest record shops are 12 and 14 miles away, and they're bog standard HMVs, so no real chance of buying, second-hand albums. I have to rely on Discogs online or the bi-monthly Kendal Record Fair, which itself is about 75 miles away, 150-mile round trip. But back end of last year, I found a new online resource, at least new to me. It's probably been around for ages, and that is VinylNet. I'll leave the link down below. VinylNet seems to be a collaboration between a number of different independent record stores here in the UK who have got together to have one single online presence. And last few months I've bought quite a dozen or so albums from them, all excellent albums, well, to my mind, excellent albums at very good price. And that's what I'd like to concentrate on today. The first is an album by a band called The Ghost. For 1 second. Now, I think it was Nikko showed the album by the band The Velvet Fog a while back, and he enthused over it. Now, the Velvet Fog, when they split up, their guitarist Paul Eastman set up the band The Ghost. Now, The Ghost are a sort of psych proto-prog band, though with progressive folk leanings on some tracks. The tracks sort of split between the sort of proto-prog ones and those in the sort of Trees Fairport vein. And the vocals split between Paul Eastman himself and Shirley Kent, who's actually a very good vocalist. This is an excellent album. He's a great guitarist. She's a good vocalist. I actually prefer the folk tracks, but this is well worth checking out. This isn't the original cover for the album. This is a re-release on the Bam Caruso label. Not sure what year. The original album came out in 1970. I'm not sure what year this was produced, but well worth checking out. Once they only made the one album, which is actually called When You're Dead 1 Second, when it was originally produced. This album is the same, includes the same tracks as the original 1970 album, though they're in a different order on here, and it also includes 2 sides of a single that they produced at the time. Once after they'd done this album, they split up, but then some of them reformed later to form a band called Virginia Tree that was more in the folk vein rather than the psych prog. Oh, and the drummer, Charlie Grimmer, went on to play with Roy Wood's Wizard. Anyway, that was the first album. Nikko, if you're watching, you might want to check that one out if you like Velvet Fog. Second up is the album by Merle Sanders, Jerry Garcia, John Kahn, Bill Vitt, live at the Keystone. Had this on CD for a long time. I'm really glad to find it on vinyl. It's a double live album, and it includes, like a lot of Garcia's solo stuff, you get R&B, jazz, folky tracks, rock tracks, you know, even standards, and Dylan, all mixed up, done in that sort of languid, slow style that Garcia loves to do now, which I think is just stunning. This is one of my favourites of his live albums. Well worth checking out. Next up, you get to some prime jazz rock and the band Izotope. This band was a four-piece with Brian Miller on keyboards, Nigel Morris on drums, Jeff Klein on bass, and Gary Boyle on guitar. This was their first album. It's on the Gull label and it was from 1974. After this album, Miller and Klein left, I think, and in came Hugh Hopper of Soft Machine fame on bass. The second album is actually better than this one, more adventurous, but this is solid early 70s, you know, jazz rock fusion in that sort of little bit Mahavishnu vein. Well worth checking out. I've said that again. Repeat myself. Sticking with jazz rock, one I was really pleased to find, National Health, D.S. Lakota. National Health I absolutely adore. Their first two albums are classics that should deserve to be in anybody's record collection. In 1979, Dave Stewart left and Alan Cohen joined the band. Alan Gowan joined the band and played live with him till his death in 1981 from leukemia. A year later, I think the band had already split up by this point, they got back together to do a tribute to him, with Dave Stewart back on keyboards, Phil Miller on guitar, John Greaves on bass and Pip Pyle on drums. Stellar lineup. Now, this doesn't match the first two albums, I have to admit. So it's not an out-and-out classic. It suffers a bit from early 80s production values, but it's an enjoyable album in its own right. Worth having, and I'm really glad to have found it. I didn't even know that it had come out on vinyl initially. By the way, all the tracks are Gowan compositions, and in fact two of them were actually recorded by his band Gilgamesh previously. So this in a way sounds a bit like a Gilgamesh National Health split, but worth having again. Next up we go to prog and we get Vital by Van de Graaff live, their very first live album. This was after they'd come back and produced the God Bluff World Record Still Life trilogy of albums. A new band was basically formed by Pete Hamill, that included Graham Smith on violin, Charles Dickey on cello, Nick Potter on bass, and Guy Evans on drums. No Hugh Banton, and David Jackson wasn't originally a member of that band either, but appears on here on the last three sides as a guest. They dropped the generator from the name. They did one album, a studio album, and then produced this live album. It's often gets a bit of a kick in this album because it is very raw, loud. Doesn't have the subtleties of Van de Graaff Generator at their best. It can be quite disconcerting when you listen to it. I like it, but that rawness. I miss Hugh Banton's keyboards more than anything else, and even though David Jackson is on here, to be honest, the sax seems to be mixed right down, along with the cello. You can't really hear them. I think it's a decent album, but they had done better. Next, filling up another hole in my Vangelis collection, Apocalypse des Animaux Génériques, or Apocalypse des Animaux. This was a soundtrack he did for a wildlife documentary in France. I think it was originally recorded in 1970 but not released in France until 1973, but not released over here in the UK until 1976. This is, I'm going to say, typical Vangelis. It's excellent, probably more new age than some of his music, but I like this very much. Next we get another electronic keyboardist, the great Klaus Schulze with Time Wind. This I think was from 1975 on the Virgin label, and anything, it's lush, brilliant synth work, 2 long tracks, Sidelong Trucks. Anything that Klaus Schulze did in the 70s is great. He never put a foot wrong to my mind. Brilliant album. Sticking with German keyboard players, we have Eberhard Schöner with Sky Music, Mountain Music. Again, this is 2 Sidelong Trucks. Again, probably what you might call as new age, but I think it has more than that term normally denotes. 2 long ambient tracks. In fact, the first one, Sky Music, some of the music is created by tuned whistles and small bells attached to the chests of carrier pigeons who were then released into a wind tunnel, and it's the vibrations of the whistles and bells that produces the organ-like sound on this album. This is from 1984 and it's on the Kuckuck label, a famous label if you're into, you know, krautrock. Nice album, beautiful ambient music. Excuse me, I think I'm coming down with a cold. My throat's going. Next up, one of my favourite guitarists of all time. I'm a massive Yes fan. This is Steve Howe's first album, Beginnings, with the usual Roger Dean cover. This was recorded, when was it, 1975 was it? Yeah, 1975. This is when they all took time off to record their solo albums. This gets some bad press because of the vocals. Now Steve Howe is not a great, he's not a great vocalist, though his vocals work well as, you know, as backing vocals for Yes. Excellent there. But I like this album. I don't think he's as bad a vocalist as some people make out. His next second album is meant called just a Steve Howe album. I think it's meant to be better than this one. But I think this is a nice album. So I was pleased to pick it up at quite a cheap price. Next, another favourite prog band of mine, Barclay James Harvest, and the album Baby James Harvest. Considered probably the weakest of their early albums, but still has some great tracks like Summer Soldier, which is I think one of their classic tracks. I think the main problem with this is Willie Wollstone doesn't play much of a part in this. Half the album, half the tracks he doesn't even appear on, which I think is possibly part of the reason why it's not quite as good as it could have been. But I would still recommend it. Next, back to jazz rock and the Dutch band Solution. This is a double album and includes their first album Solution and their second album Divergence. There you go. The first album, to my mind, is a classic European jazz rock album. Absolutely brilliant album. The second, Divergence, I don't think matches the first. It's a decent album, but it has a couple of ballads on that don't really do a lot for me. Though it does have the title track Divergence, which, if you're a Focus fan, which I am, you'll recognise as the part of the track Eruption that Focus did on their album Moving Waves. There they called it Tommy, and their version I think was actually recorded before Solutions was. So not more to say. Get it if you can find this first album particularly, and you like that sort of classic jazz rock, European jazz rock of the 70s, buy it, because this is excellent, excellent. Next, we get krautrock with Guru Guru live. Guru Guru are one of my favourite krautrock bands. Their early demented psych krautrock I absolutely love. By this point, which was it? Again, I think for some reason I think this was about 1975 as well. They were a different band. The only original member was Manny Neumeier on drums. This also included Roland Schaefer on guitar and saxophone, Dieter Bornschlegel on guitar, and Peter Kuhnstedt on bass. And they had moved more into the sort of jazz rock fusion, still with a manic twist to it half the time, but more into that vein, but still producing superb music. This is well worth having. This is a reissue on the Think Progressive label. Check it out if you can. And finally, from VinylNet, I picked up the album Circus by Circus. This is the album where Mel Collins came to attention. Mel Collins being the saxon flute player who joined King Crimson, played with Camel, dozens others, and is now back with King Crimson. This was from 1969. It is a sort of proto jazz rock prog album of the period. It includes quite a number of standards. They do Beatles' Norwegian Wood, the Mamas and the Papas Monday Monday, and they do tracks by Sonny Rollins and Charles Mingus. I think this is an excellent album. Well worth your money if you can get a copy. This is again a reissue. This was done by the Italian Get Back label in 1999. Check it out. And I'd like to finish off with just 3 albums I got on Discogs from a German seller on there. Now the album I was looking for was this one, Falkenstein Feuerstuhl. Now Falkenstein were a mid-70s, late 70s German, well, they started off as a folk rock band. When I was at university, my best friend there was a German language student, and he spent his 3rd year teaching in Germany, and he would bring me back some albums. We were both massive electric folk fans, and he'd bring me back albums by bands like Augenweide, Achim Reichel's That Shanty album, and he brought me back the first Falkenstein album, which I think is a classic folk rock album in the sort of Augenweide vein. They did 2 further albums. This is their 2nd, and they did a 3rd called Illusion. With these 2, they moved, the second 2, they moved more towards that sort of like progressive vein rather. The folk rock element in this album started to move away. I think by the 3rd album it had gone all together really. But I've been looking for these 2 albums. My friend had put them on tape for me years back. I still think they're well worth having. So I'm looking for the 3rd one now to complete my Falkenstein collection. And also from the same guy, and speaking of Augenweide, I got their 1981 album, I think it is, Noch aber ist April. Pretty enough cover to be fair, as was the Falkenstein. By this point, I think this was the last album they did before splitting up. They've since reformed 2 or 3 times at least, I think. And they were writing their own material by this point, and it's not as good as their early classic stuff. Their first 4 or 5 albums, I think, are just superb. I absolutely love Augenweide, one of my favourite bands. But having said that, I still think this is an enjoyable album, and like I say, it helps me to get close to completing my Augenweide vinyl collection. I've only got the album before this to get, which I can work out what. Bear with me. Jahrmarkt. That's the album that I still need to get. If I can find a decent quality copy at a decent price. Maybe only for real big fans of Augenweide, because like I say, they had changed a bit by this point. And I finished off from that same seller, again helped me to complete part of a collection, Exception 5, the Dutch classical rock band led by the excellent keyboardist Rick van der Linden. In the last year or so, I had bought the first 4 albums by them. So when I saw he had this going cheap, I had to get this. This is on the Philips label, and what year was this from? Check it out. It doesn't say, but I think I've got a feeling it might be around 1972 that this came out. But I really like their stuff. If you like what the Nice were doing with their classical rock interpretations, then you probably would like this. Anyway, that's it for now. I've still got stuff I've bought last year that I haven't got round to showing yet. Hopefully I will do that soon. So, but everybody, take care. Bye.